Okay, maybe we should start. Okay, the story we left off was from Mullah Sadiq that delivered a sermon. This is in Yazd, I believe, where Mirza Ahmad was the person that was giving the sermon initially which was a Shiite, delivering the normal prayer, and then Mullah Sadiq came after him, which was his guest, and delivered this sermon for one of the well-known BÁB'S writings. And of course, it created an uproar, and people tried to harm him, and then Mullah, of course, right. So, but Mullah Sadiq was the one that delivered the sermon.
Right. And
so
Sayyid Hussein was the one who rescued him.
Right. So he was the major person in the town that was running the sermons at the mosque. So that's where he was practicing, basically, Sayyid Hussein. So here we're going to take the story from there. Mullah Sadiq was the guest of Sayyid Hussein as well. Okay, this is, remember, the Mullah Sadiq was the one that they threw him out of SHÍRÁZ because he created uproar there. And they put, so now he went to Yazd.
Mullah Yusuf-e Ardibili likewise was subjected in those days to a persecution fiercer and more determined than the savage onslaught which the people of Yazd had directed against Mullah Sadiq. But for the intervention of Mirza Ahmad and the assistance of his uncle, he would have fallen a victim to the wrath of a ferocious enemy. When Mullah Sadiq and Mullah Yusuf-e Ardibili arrived at Kirman, they again had to submit to similar indignities and to suffer similar afflictions at the hands of Haji Mirza Karim Khan and his associates. Haji Syed Javad's persistent exertions freed them eventually from the grasp of their persecutors and enabled them to proceed to Khorasan. Though hunted and harassed by their foes, the Bab's immediate disciples, together with their companions in different parts of Persia, were undeterred by such criminal acts from the accomplishment of their task. Unswerving in their purpose and immovable in their convictions, they continued to battle with the dark forces that assailed them every step of their path. By their unstinted devotion and unexampled fortitude, they were able to demonstrate to many of their countrymen the ennobling influence of the faith they had arisen to champion. While Wahid, title given by the Bab to Syed Yahya-e Darabi, was still in Shiraz, Haji Syed Javad-e Karbilai arrived and was introduced by Haji Mirza Syed Ali into the presence of the Bab. In a tablet which he addressed to Wahid and Haji Syed Javad, the Bab extolled the firmness of their faith and stressed the unalterable character of their devotion. The latter had met and known the Bab before the declaration of his mission, and had been a fervent admirer of those extraordinary traits of character which had distinguished him ever since his childhood. At a later time he met Baha'u'llah in Baghdad, and became the recipient of his special favor. When, a few years afterwards, Baha'u'llah was exiled to Adrianople, he, already very much advanced in years, returned to Persia, tarried a while in the province of Iraq, and thence proceeded to Khorasan. His kindly disposition, extreme forbearance, and unaffected simplicity earned him the appellation of the Syed-i-Nur, literally meaning radiant Syed. Haji Syed Javad one day, while crossing a street in Tehran, suddenly saw the Shah as he was passing on horseback. Undisturbed by the presence of his sovereign, he calmly approached and greeted him. His venerable figure and dignity of bearing pleased the Shah immensely. He acknowledged his salute and invited him to come and see him. Such was the reception accorded him But the courtiers of the Shah were moved with envy. "Does not your Imperial Majesty realize," they protested, "that this Haji Syed Javad is none other than the man who, even prior to the declaration of the Syed-i-Bab, had proclaimed himself a Bab'i and had pledged his undying loyalty to his person?" The Shah, perceiving the malice which actuated their accusation, was sorely displeased, and rebuked them for their temerity and low-mindedness. "How strange," he is reported to have exclaimed, "whoever is distinguished by the uprightness of his conduct and the courtesy of his manners, my people forthwith denounce him as a Bab'i and regard him as an object worthy of my condemnation." Haji Syed Javad spent the last days of his life in Kerman, and remained until his last hour a staunch supporter of the faith. He never wavered in his convictions, nor relaxed in his unsparing endeavors for the diffusion of the cause. Sheikh Sultan-i Karbilai, whose ancestors ranked among the leading ulamas of Karbila, and who himself had been a firm supporter and intimate companion of Sayyid Qasim, was also among those who, in those days, had met the Bab in Shiraz. It was he who, at a later time, proceeded to Selemani in search of Baha'u'llah, and whose daughter was subsequently given in marriage to Akhe-i Kalim. When he arrived at Shiraz, he was accompanied by Sheikh Hassan-i Zunusi, to whom we have referred in the early pages of this narrative. To him the Bab assigned the task of transcribing, in collaboration with Mullah Abdul Karim, the tablets which he had lately revealed. Sheikh Sultan, who had been too ill at the time of his arrival to meet the Bab, received one night, while still on his sickbed, a message from his beloved, informing him that at about 2 hours after sunset he would himself visit him. That night the Ethiopian servant, who was acting as lantern-bearer to his master, was instructed to walk in advance at a distance which would keep away the attention of the people from him, and to extinguish the lantern as soon as he had reached his destination. I have heard Sheikh Sultan himself describe that nocturnal visit. The Bab, who had bidden me extinguish the lamp in my room ere he arrived, came straight to my bedside. In the midst of the darkness which enveloped us, I was holding fast to the hem of his garment, and was imploring him, "Fulfill my desire, O beloved of my heart, and allow me to sacrifice myself for thee, for no one else except thee is able to confer upon me this favor." "O Sheikh," the Bab replied, "I too yearn to immolate myself upon the altar of sacrifice. It behoves us both to cling to the garment of the best beloved, and to seek from him the joy and glory of martyrdom in his path. Rest assured I will, in your behalf, supplicate the Almighty to enable you to attain his presence. Remember me on that day, a day such as the world has never seen before." As the hour of parting approached, he placed in my hand a gift which he asked me to expend for myself. I tried to refuse, but he begged me to accept it. Finally, I acceded to his wish, whereupon he arose and departed. The allusion of the Bab that night to his best beloved excited my wonder and curiosity. In the years that followed, I oftentimes believed that the one to whom the Bab had referred was none other than Tahiri. I even imagined Syed-i-Uluf to be that person. I was sorely perplexed and knew not how to unravel this mystery. When I reached Karbila and attained the presence of Baha'u'llah, I became firmly convinced that he alone could claim such affection from the Bab, that he, and only he, could be worthy of such adoration. The second Nowruz after the declaration of the Bab's mission, which fell on the 21st day of the month of Rabiul Awwal in the year AH 1262, AD 1846, found the Bab still in Shiraz, enjoying, under circumstances of comparative tranquillity and ease, the blessings of undisturbed association with his family and kindred. Quietly and unceremoniously, he celebrated the festival of Nowruz in his own home, and in accordance with his invariable custom, bountifully conferred upon both his mother and his wife the marks of his affection and favor. By the wisdom of his counsels and the tenderness of his love, he cheered their hearts and dispelled their apprehensions. He bequeathed to them all his possessions, and transferred to their names the title of his property. In a document which he himself wrote and signed, he directed that his house and its furniture, as well as the rest of his estate, should be regarded as the exclusive property of his mother and his wife, and that upon the death of the former, her share of the property should revert to his wife.
Okay, these are, so let's stop here. So these are stories of people that gotten close to the basically Bab and try to dissipate the message, and they were attacked basically regularly. And so the last story really relates to references of Bab to coming of Baha'u'llah, or the new manifestation, where of course everyone that was around were looking for it as well, because they were expecting two manifestations. One obviously was Bab, which is the door. The other one was the return of Jesus on the Sunni side, and the Shiites were believing return of Imam Hussein. So they were looking for that, and this Sheikh Sultan himself recalls a story that, and he was part of those group that came from a Sheikhi movement, and I believe Sayyid Kazem, one of the students of Sayyid Kazem. So he basically was looking for, and from the people that he knew, first he thought that Tahir was the most educated one and most learned of all, and he thought Tahir would be the new manifestation. And or Sayyid Olov, that person is another person. Now the story goes back when Bab was in Shiraz, and of course he was expecting to be martyred in the path of the manifestations, and he's basically writing his will. The important part about this segment, and what we want to talk about, is in the Islamic doctrine, actually a family of the person that is passed away will receive a portion of it. Actually, the first male offspring, and so the uncles had actually claim to the estate as well. So what he did here, which is quite interesting, during his basically writing of his will, he actually offered all his possession, and of course their main residence, to his mother and his wife, because his son passed away. So this really shows that he was basically exercising edicts of this new religion, trying to basically show the reverse of what was the traditions at the time.
At the time, it was usually the males who inherited
Right.
what was going against convention.
Actually, at other times, the brother of the person who was deceased would be the executor of the will, and they would that's how the asset would stay in the family. But there are other problems with that scheme also, is that in the time which this edict is used against Baha'is even today, where if you're a non-Muslim, or not non-Muslim, if you pass away and you converted from Muslim to Baha'i, and these were all Muslims obviously, then all your asset would go to the Muslim member of your family. So what happened in this environment, basically male family members of the Bab would have claim against his estate. But what he did by transferring this to the woman, basically during his life, he transferred these properties so they couldn't do anything, generally. So, but it shows the contrast of the new religion and the status of women at the time of Bab. Yes, sure.
For example, if he wouldn't give all this estate to his wife and mother, how another person would take it, like a male, as you said,
Yeah.
how would they leave?
That's the problem. You see, the women at the time were considered property of the male. So the brother of Bab would inherit the family and the assets. And they're supposed to be providing because women couldn't work. They were basically helpless and they're supposed to be under protection of the male. Is a male, it was and still is a male-dominated society. So women are still getting discriminated against. So this culture, although none of these things that are happening is directly related to Islam, this was completely twisted after 1500 years, and they created their own laws. This is Shiites. And Baha'u'llah was mentioning that this was the worst dilapidated society on earth. That means everything was twisted, basically. And one of the major aspects was the suppression of women in that society.
Sunnis are not this way?
Sorry?
Sunnis?
Is not as defined as it's in Shiites is. Sunnis have the same problem. You go to Saudi Arabia, of course, they're Wahhabis, which is another branch. Their females cannot drive. Can you believe this? In Saudi Arabia, a female cannot drive. So there are the prejudices, and of course, these are mostly cultural, and but obviously, they propagated the culture and slowly changed Islam to what it is today, which is really doesn't have a good impression in general. But even today, for example, in many of Baha'i cities, when a Baha'i passes away, if there are, and I'm sure they have Muslim family members, and some of them are quite hostile to Baha'is because they think that their brother or their uncle became an infidel. So they go and try to harm them by resurrecting this law that they shouldn't be inheriting anything because they're infidels, and their asset would go to a Muslim. That's why Baha'is now, for precaution, they transfer their assets to their children before they pass on. So the Muslim family member cannot come and take it over. It's a bizarre situation. In its 20th century, these things are happening. So it's quite intriguing. And some of the stuff regarding Tahir was the first one that started the emancipation of women, as we were mentioning, that she had a lot of followers. And ironically, when she was sermoning, she had a curtain, and most of the students were male, obviously. These are talabes, or people that were studying Quranic law, were her students. But she had a curtain, speaking through the curtain so they wouldn't see her face. So it's just quite interesting, the concept. And in Badasht, which we read last couple of sessions, reference to it, which she took her veil off, and there were everybody there that gathered, a few hundred people, were trying to basically declare that this new Bab'i manifestation is not continuation of Shiite, and it's a completely new religion. So the way they planned it was she actually took her veil off in front of all males, and these are zealot, basic Shiites that believed in the new manifestation, but they still didn't have this in mind, that this is actually separation, and the Islamic doctrine has terminated. And that's how she presented it, that this equality of men and women, and there is no veils anymore. Ironically, as I was mentioning before, that this act that she did, and of course 50 years later, all over the world, this message started to develop, and people will recognize and obviously try to propagate that. And if you look at even this country, it's about 90 years, 80 some years that women can even vote. They couldn't vote before. Now, when Bab'i religion came in, it declared equality of men and women. Women could vote. They could inherit wealth as men did. They could divorce their husband. So this was, remember, this is an era where the woman was property of male. And somebody coming in and say, look, these guys are spiritual equal of male, and they have inherent rights as men do. So this was, and you see why even today.
This is today, though. I mean, it still happens.
Of course, no?
My friend who was transferred to Riyadh with our company, and fortunately we didn't go, but when she got there, she said even the airport, there were certain areas in the airport where women were not allowed to walk.
Sure.
And her little girl didn't realize this, and neither did she as she was arriving. And her little girl walked into an area that was not allowed. She said the police were there like that, scooped her up. She went nuts, of course, and ended up crossing into the wrong thing. And she said, what a hoopla, day one that we arrived. Their stuff came over, and they were living in a compound, foreigners' compound that is provided by our company. And their stuff arrived. Their Bibles weren't there, their Christmas trees weren't there, none of the children's dolls were there. Stuffed animals were allowed, but not her baby dolls, because they had a face or something. She says, I don't know what it was, but she says none of her little Barbie dolls or anything were there. Her baby dolls, it was all taken away. So, like their Bibles and stuff like that had to come in diplomatic crates later on. They had to go and rebuy the stuff. She said, they only lasted a year because she went nuts there, because she wasn't allowed to even go to a video rental place. She had a driver who drove her there. He would go in and get the list of the videos, bring them out.
Of course.
She could choose what she wanted from a list, an approved list. She would choose them, hand them to the driver, who would go and get them.
You know, the funny part is that all of them have dishes, satellite dishes, and they can see everything anyways. So it's just the front of it, you know, it's a facade. No, it's...
I mean, it was just, she said it was amazing. She couldn't go anyplace, and the children were always nervous, especially her daughter who has bright red hair, and they always had to wear headpieces. And people would see the red hair coming out and come over and touch her, and she said it was just too nerve-wracking, she couldn't do it. And they always had to be accompanied by men, wherever they went.
Of course. And these are...
And she said, yeah, of course, in England, where we lived at the time, the women would come over from Saudi Arabia and be all decked out and spiky shoes and they had sky-high hair and the makeup and everything. And it was like they went nuts when they got a little taste of freedom. And she goes, holy cow, she said, they go and live in their country. And she says, it was too much. They didn't last. They lasted a year and they was about it. She says, I'm not used to this. She says, how they can do that and then go back to that after having lived in England, for a little while, and then having to go back again.
No, of course. So the whole purpose of religion is to bring humanity to reality, what the reality is and what's applicable to today. And you see most of the movements that occurred in the West has a Baha'i root, and it was promoted by Baha'is in general.
The mother of the Bab failed at first to recognize the significance of the mission proclaimed by her son. She remained for a time unaware of the magnitude of the forces latent in his revelation. As she approached the end of her life, however, she was able to perceive the inestimable quality of that treasure which she had conceived and given to the world. It was Baha'u'llah who eventually enabled her to discover the value of that hidden treasure, which had lain for so many years concealed from her eyes. She was living in Iraq, where she hoped to spend the remaining days of her life, when Baha'u'llah instructed two of his devoted followers, Haji Syed Javad-e Karbelai and the wife of Haji Abdul Majid-e Shirazi, both of whom were already intimately acquainted with her, to instruct her in the principles of the faith. She acknowledged the truth of the cause and remained until the closing years of the 13th century A.H., that is, the 13th century A.H. ended in October A.D. 1882, when she departed this life, fully aware of the bountiful gifts which the Almighty had chosen to confer upon her. The wife of the Bab, unlike his mother, perceived at the earliest dawn of his revelation the glory and uniqueness of his mission, and felt from the beginning the intensity of its force. No one except Tahiri, among the women of her generation, surpassed her in the spontaneous character of her devotion, nor excelled the fervor of her faith. To her, the Bab confided the secret of his future sufferings, and unfolded to her eyes the significance of the events that were to transpire in his day. He bade her not to divulge this secret to his mother, and counselled her to be patient and resigned to the will of God. He entrusted her with a special prayer, revealed and written by himself, the reading of which, he assured her, would remove her difficulties and lighten the burden of her woes. In the hour of your perplexity, he directed her, recite this prayer ere you go to sleep. I myself will appear to you, and will banish your anxiety. Faithful to his advice, every time she turned to him in prayer, the light of his unfailing guidance illumined her path and resolved her problems. After the Bab had settled the affairs of his household and provided for the future maintenance of both his mother and his wife, he transferred his residence from his own home to that of Haji Mirza Syed Ali. There he awaited the approaching hour of his sufferings. He knew that the afflictions which were in store for him could no longer be delayed, that he was soon to be caught in a whirlpool of adversity which would carry him swiftly to the field of martyrdom, the crowning object of his life. He bade those of his disciples who had settled in Shiraz, among whom were Mullah Abdul Karim and Sheikh Hassan Izunuzi, to proceed to Isfahan and there await his further instructions. Syed Hussein-i Yazdi, one of the Letters of the Living, who had recently arrived at Shiraz, was likewise instructed to proceed to Isfahan and join the company of his fellow disciples in that city. Meanwhile, Hussein Khan, the governor of Fars, was bending every effort to involve the Bab in fresh embarrassments and to degrade him still further in the eyes of the public. The smouldering fire of his hostility was fanned to flame by the knowledge that the Bab was allowed to pursue unmolested the course of his activities, that he was still able to associate with certain of his companions, and that he continued to enjoy the benefits of unrestrained fellowship with his family and kindred. By the aid of his secret agents, he succeeded in obtaining accurate information regarding the character and influence of the movement which the Bab had initiated. He had secretly watched his movements, ascertained the degree of enthusiasm which he had aroused, and scrutinized the motives, the conduct, and the number of those who had embraced his cause.
Obviously, we went through that process, and Bob moved to his uncle's residence and expected the whole structure of the ecclesiastical system and the government to come after him, because now his popularity was becoming very large for them, and it was a threat, a political and religious threat. And of course, these ideas related to this new culture that he was trying to promote was completely against the hierarchy of the ecclesiastical, which were collecting taxes as well. And of course, they had degrees and control of the courts as well. So when someone comes in and abrogate the intermediary of humans and God, obviously priests don't like him. And this is exactly what the realization was, where Bob was initiating independent investigation of the truth, and each individual would basically find the source of the new manifestation, talking to God, and there was no interpreter. There was no hierarchy of clergy. So there were no priests, basically. And this was completely revolutionary. And of course, a lot of people that were saying the source of corruption, both in the ecclesiastical or court system, was the clergy, because they were controlling it. So this was very popular with the learned people in Shiite doctrine at the time, that they would see the ills of the society in general. And of course, the Sheikh Ahmad or Sheikhi movement was the beginning of this movement to introduce this new, or expecting the new manifestation to come in and basically change the society. So he was anticipating this particular events to occur against him, and of course, to his demise, they would destroy him. So he would clearly knew this. But there are several aspects about this process that the question of martyrdom, in a sense, is a different aspect. So what you see people taking arms, or definition of martyrdom has basically changed in this manifestation. So obviously during the, you see this see here, when you go to people on two sides of conflict, right? Each side, they take up arms, and in the defense of their ideology, they would basically attack the other side. And if they perish or they get killed, the society that they came from declared them as a martyr, because they actually fought for the ideology. Here is completely different issue. The issue is not attacking somebody. So the martyrdom is a completely different story. In a Baha'i religion, this abrogation of the force, that means you cannot and should not propagate your ideology through sword. And you cannot deny your own faith either. So these are the key elements that permanently moves societies. Because if there is a conflict, it doesn't matter which side you're on, right? And you're creating harm. So this issue of propagation of ideology true taking of arms was abrogated, because he clearly could have created a problem for the government.
You mean holy wars?
Of course, the holy wars are right. Not even holy wars in a sense, but this quote-unquote jihad that they're talking about in Islamic culture today was completely abrogated. No, it's not a revolution. It's a question of defending your position. Materially also. See this, you cannot defend your position, and this is the whole issue of martyrdom was, that you cannot defend your position, of course in a religious sense. That means that if you're attacked because of your religion, this is different than getting attacked.
And going in and attacking.
Right, attacking or getting attacked because a thief would enter your house. This is a completely different story. So defense of the religion was taken away. So it's a very interesting concept, and this is really the new generation, because during Islamic dispensation, not only you could have jihad means actually defending yourself. Means that you try something over and over again to achieve your goal, but not in a attacking way. So
It's the idea of like a struggle.
jihad is a struggle, basically.
Not attack, but like
Right.
a struggle.
So the whole idea.
Nowadays, it's an attack, isn't it?
No, let me explain. This is very.
Nowadays, you think of them getting, like ISIS
they're
now, getting an army and going out and doing atrocities.
They're misinterpreting, actually.
They're misinterpreting
Right.
it.
The reality of it was, at a time, there was no alternative. It wasn't internet. There was no planes. There were no means of communication. There was nothing there. Remember, the only way you could do this is to migrate people to the areas and introduce this. Obviously, in the process, if you do that and the population or government would raise against you, they were allowed to defend themselves. And this was the issue of jihad, is bringing the message to people, and if they didn't accept, it was fine, because during the Islamic dispensation, not afterward, of course, during the initial Islamic spread, if they were attacked, they would defend themselves. And this was the issue of the jihad that we're talking about. So it's a completely different aspects today. But if you look closely, how did the Islamic movement occur? How would maybe 5,000-6,000 nomads without any armor or weapons of mass destruction or anything could topple a Persian government that had hundreds of thousands of soldiers? Reality is that the ideology they brought in would free society, and people that were embraced the ideology, they liked the ideology, and they despised the priests of Zoroastrian priests that were controlling everything and created caste system. They saw an ideology that would free them from these chains of this caste system that were created at the time. So majority of them really wanted to get rid of the existing government, which was controlled, and of course the central government was very weak, and you had these chieftains all over the place, and they were doing their own taxes and their own systems, and people were in pain. And when Islam came in, they accepted. As they accepted those, and it shows in a couple of wars even, where Islamic soldiers moved toward those, I don't recall exactly the name of the war, but the entire Persian army that was there, one of the branches of them actually completely switched side because they didn't want to keep the government. They were alienated, basically. And that's how Islam spread toward Iran. But during those periods, they never forced like Jews or Christians to become Muslims. Way after those, this issue of Shiites started in Iran during Safavid dynasty, which is about 400 years ago. So a lot of these things that you're seeing and cultural that we see here came out of this clash between Ottoman Empire, which was Sunnis, and ironically, the Safavid dynasty, they were Turk themselves also. And they picked this minute religion called Shiite and propagated this, and they created atrocity, and they did ethnic cleansing. They completely destroyed other religions in Iran from about 400 some years ago.
So that's not the true meaning of jihad then. The true meaning of jihad is more ideological.
Right. Exercise and struggle.
I think jihad means self-cleansing. See, that's what it means.
But I think nowadays when you hear that, people just go,
You think warfare,
war.
you think
You
fighting.
think warfare not in an ideological sense, but more in
internal
swords
struggle.
and bombs and, yeah.
Internal struggle.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
Abdul-Baha explained that. But even Abdul-Baha himself used the word of jihad a couple places. That means internal struggle. That means you be able to do self-construction and self-learning and be able to get rid of partisan culture. That's what he uses.
Alongside that, one of the great ironies, I think, about the way jihad is used nowadays is if you look into Islam, there's this concept or idea of the greatest jihad, the great jihad. And what that is, it's not a physical war. It's literally referring to the struggle that we as humans face in trying to better ourselves and become more spiritual and obey the will of God.
Right. But the whole concept, and as the Shaykhi movement occurred, the whole process was that those scholars of the Shiites recognized that the Islamic religion is not mendable anymore. You can't reform it. I mean, the Christianity survived because it adopted. It adopted the modernization and ideology of the modern society. And if you look closely, majority of the progress in the West was application of these doctrine, this modernity doctrine, which source of it was Baha'i religion anyways. So this is really the whole process where if you go against the Holy Spirit or blueprint of what manifestation of God brings, there's suffering that is going to happen. So it's the same way you may not believe in law of gravity, but it doesn't matter if you jump out of the 5th floor of a building. You're going to come down. It doesn't matter what religion you have, whether you believe in gravity or you don't. You come down. So, and this is exactly what is happening. They're applying an obsolete methodology that doesn't belong to today, and humanity as a whole, because they didn't accept Baha'i doctrine, they're suffering and slowly trying to why you shouldn't take up arms. Why should separation of church and state occur? So these are key elements was infused in the society. This ideology was infused there, and slowly humanity is applying it. But the price these guys paid, that in terms of not deviating from that doctrine shows in the history that they had alternative and options that they didn't exercise because they were true to their own word or blueprint of word of God, which is the Holy Spirit. So they followed these processes. This is amazing in the history of religion that something like this would happen.
One night there came to Hussein Khan, the chief of his emissaries, with a report that the number of those who were crowding to see the Bab had assumed such proportions as to necessitate immediate action on the part of those whose function it was to guard the security of that city. The eager crowd that gathers every night to visit the Bab, he remarked, surpasses in number the multitude of people that throngs every day before the gates of the seat of your government. Among them are to be seen men celebrated alike for their exalted rank and intensive learning. Such are the tact and lavish generosity which his maternal uncle displays in his attitude towards the officials of your government, that no one among your subordinates is inclined to acquaint you with the reality of the situation. If you would permit me, I will, with the aid of a number of your attendants, surprise the Bab at the hour of midnight, and will deliver, handcuffed, into your hands certain of his associates who will enlighten you concerning his activities, and who will confirm the truth of my statements.
So here, let's talk quickly. Now you see there were big problems that he was creating. First of all, that he was more popular than the government and this Hussein Khan, which was governor of Fars. And so he saw the popularity increasing dramatically. But more than that, it was majority of the clergy that was in town were basically disturbed because this movement would take away the power they had over people. Because if this movement would have grown, they would have lost their job, they would have lost their revenue, source of revenue, and of course the hierarchy that existed at the time. So you see the popularity as it was growing. And ironically, majority of people that were coming to visit Bab were learned people that had well-known reputation in understanding Quranic laws. So these weren't just basically common population that was visiting Bab. These were most learned Islamic scholars that were visiting him and trying to find out what this new movement is. And this really created that anxiety both on the clergy and the government regarding this movement.
Hussein Khan refused to comply with his wish. I can tell better than you, was his answer, what the interests of the state require. Watch me from a distance. I shall know how to deal with him. That very moment, the governor summoned Abdul Hamid Khan, the chief constable of the city. Proceed immediately, he commanded him, to the house of Haji Mirza Syed Ali. Quietly and unobserved, scale the wall and ascend to the roof, and from there suddenly enter his home. Arrest the Syedi Bab immediately, and conduct him to this place together with any of the visitors who may be present with him at that time. Confiscate whatever books and documents you are able to find in that house. As to Haji Mirza Syed Ali, it is my intention to impose upon him the following day the penalty for having failed to redeem his promise. I swear by the imperial diadem of Muhammad Shah that this very night I shall have the Syedi Bab executed together with his wretched companions.
Okay, here when you look at this Haji Mirza Syed Ali, this is uncle of the Bab that gave his word and signed the document that Bab is not going to create problems for the government, and was at the time that he confessed that he is not the gates, the four gates or representative of the 12th Imam, because he actually declared he is the 12th Imam. So he was telling the truth, but because this document was with the governor of the Fars, he said, look, now I can use that and try to destroy him and his uncle.
Their ignominious death will quench the flame they have kindled, and will awaken every would-be follower of that creed to the danger that awaits every disturber of the peace in this realm. By this act I shall have extirpated a heresy, the continuance of which constitutes the gravest menace to the interest of the state. Abdul Hamid Khan retired to execute his task. He, together with his assistants, broke into the house of Haji Mirza Syed Ali on the 23rd of September AD 1845, and found the Bab in the company of his maternal uncle and a certain Syed Qasim-i Zanjani, who was later martyred in Mazindaran, and whose brother, Syed Murtaza, was one of the 7 martyrs of Tehran. He immediately arrested them, collected whatever documents he could find, ordered Haji Mirza Syed Ali to remain in his house, and conducted the rest to the seat of government. The Bab, undaunted and self-possessed, was heard to repeat this verse of the Quran: "That with which they are threatened is for the morning. Is not the morning near?"
Remember, these, like Haj Mirza Syed Ali, these were basically famous merchants also. So they had a lot of basically links, financial links, and they were paying taxes, large taxes. So they were very hesitant to directly arrest them. Go ahead.
No sooner had the chief constable reached the marketplace than he discovered, to his amazement, that the people of the city were fleeing from every side in consternation, as if overtaken by an appalling calamity. He was struck with horror when he witnessed the long train of coffins being hurriedly transported through the streets, each followed by a procession of men and women loudly uttering shrieks of agony and pain. This sudden tumult, the lamentations, the affrighted countenances, the imprecations of the multitude distressed and bewildered him. He inquired as to the reason. This very night, he was told, a plague of exceptional virulence has broken out. It was, in fact, the outbreak of cholera. We are smitten by this devastating power. Already since the hour of midnight it has extinguished the lives of over 100 people. Alarm and despair reign in every house. The people are abandoning their homes and in their plight are invoking the aid of the Almighty. A footnote says, the Bab refers to this incident in the Dala'il-i-Sadeh in the following terms. Recall the first days of the manifestation, how many people died of cholera. That was one of the wonders of the manifestation, yet no one understood it. During 4 years, the scourge raged among the Mohammedan Shiites without anyone grasping its true significance. From the Book of 7 Proofs, translated by A.L.M. Nicholas, pages 61 to 62. Abdul Hamid Khan, terrified by this dreadful intelligence, ran to the home of Hussein Khan. An old man who guarded his house and was acting as doorkeeper informed him that the house of his master was deserted, that the ravages of the pestilence had devastated his home and afflicted the members of his household. 2 of his Ethiopian maids, he was told, and a manservant have already fallen victims to this scourge, and members of his own family are now dangerously ill. In his despair, my master has abandoned his home and, leaving the dead unburied, has fled with the rest of his family to the Bab'i Takht. Footnote says a garden in the outskirts of Shiraz. Abdul Hamid Khan decided to conduct the Bab to his own home and keep him in his custody pending instructions from the governor. As he was approaching his house, he was struck by the sound of weeping and wailing of the members of his household. His son had been attacked by the plague and was hovering on the brink of death. In his despair, he threw himself at the feet of the Bab and tearfully implored him to save the life of his son. He begged him to forgive his past transgressions and misdeeds. I adjure you, he entreated the Bab as he clung to the hem of his garment, by him who has elevated you to this exalted position, to intercede in my behalf and to offer a prayer for the recovery of my son. Suffer not that he, in the prime of his youth, be taken away from me. Punish him not for the guilt which his father has committed. I repent of what I have done, and at this moment resign my post. I solemnly pledge my word that never again will I accept such a position, even though I perish of hunger. The Bab, who was in the act of performing his ablutions and was preparing to offer the prayer of dawn, directed him to take some of the water with which he was washing his face to his son and request him to drink it. This, he said, would save his life. No sooner had Abdul Hamid Khan witnessed the signs of the recovery of his son than he wrote a letter to the governor, in which he acquainted him with the whole situation and begged him to cease his attacks on the Bab. Have pity on yourself, he wrote to him. as well as on those whom Providence has committed to your care. Should the fury of this plague continue its fatal course, no one in this city, I fear, will by the end of this day have survived the horror of its attack." Hussein Khan replied that the Bab should be immediately released and given freedom to go wherever he might please. As soon as an account of these happenings reached Tehran and was brought to the attention of the Shah, an imperial edict dismissing Hussein Khan from office was issued and sent to Shiraz. From the day of his dismissal, that shameless tyrant fell a victim to countless misfortunes and was in the end unable to earn even his daily bread.
The key here is basically this process that occurs, and whenever the attack occurs in the Holy Spirit or religion of God, perpetrators of those attacks have a very punishing life. And it actually shows throughout the history of the Bab, even when they martyred the Bab, actually what happened to the condition of those people that perpetrated that crime against manifestation of God. So these are the issues that we're showing, and the power of the individual and belief in ability. And this shows very well that when people believed that he was the manifestation of God, during his desperation, this particular vice-regent of Hussein Khan, the governor, when he saw his son was dying, and he actually had no other means or chance, because they knew that Bab'i is not guilty of anything, and whatever he was bringing, the message that he was bringing had no conflict with the state, but maliciously they were trying to quench this movement in general. But at the end, because he believed in purity of Bab, he requested relief for his own son. But the interesting thing is that when the person, and this is power, shows the power of mind, that believes something would have an effect, and propagate this to even the person that is sick, that now this basically cure is at hand, and everyone in the system believes in this, has this potency to boost the immune system to defend, the body would defend itself. So this shows that even power of mind or immune system, when you strengthen it, it can actually defeat like bacteria that were entering their bodies. So it's a very clear indication of the power of mind, of what it can do in terms of boosting people to want to live and defend against even material bacteria in this environment. So any comment, questions?
You were mentioning the power of mind, and I remember when I was in school, when one of the sessions was, it was a psychology class, was they brought in a hypnotist, and the hypnotist asked for a volunteer from the class to volunteer. So one student went up, and he really put him under, and he took a chalk and put it to his skin and said, "This is a lit cigarette, and you got to burn."
Ooh.
Yeah.
So we were all witness to that, to the power of the mind.
Yeah. Wow.
No, it's amazing. These are the issues regarding powers of prayers. People that get this energy in their spirit, and it's a different discussion. So let's.
No one seemed willing or able to save him from his evil plight. When, at a later time, Baha'u'llah had been banished to Baghdad, Hussein Khan sent him a letter in which he expressed repentance and promised to atone for his past misdeeds on condition that he should regain his former position. Baha'u'llah refused to answer him. Sunk in misery and shame, he languished until his death.
And you see here, remember, Baha'u'llah was part of the, because his father was a minister at the court of Shah. So people really thought that he has a large political power, which he didn't actually. And because he moved against Bab, and later on, obviously he lost his position, which was normal at the time. And of course, I'm sure he's done a lot of other atrocities as well, that he was basically taken off from his position. And so interestingly, they still thought that Baha'u'llah had this power to wield political influence. So it shows that from a status of what Baha'is or Bab'is at the time had, and he was pleading with Baha'u'llah in terms of seeing whether through his connection to the court he could reinstate him, which in reality was he had no power. He was a prisoner himself in general.
Because you want something in return.
Right. Well, there are many aspects, as you mentioned, of the process, but the whole, one of the major reasons actually they didn't kill Baha'u'llah in Siyahchal or areas, and they were banishing him, is because although the clergy had power, but they really, because of his his knowledge about Islamic religion, as well as his link to the government, would prevent them from completely destroying him. So this is a glimpse of those still links that existed at the time.
The Bab, who was staying at the home of Abdul Hamid Khan, sent Syed Kazim to request Haji Mirza Syed Ali to come and see him. He informed his uncle of his intended departure from Shiraz, entrusted both his mother and his wife to his care, and charged him to convey to each the expression of his affection and the assurance of God's unfailing assistance. Wherever they may be, he told his uncle as he bade him farewell, God's all-encompassing love and protection will surround them. I will again meet you amid the mountains of Azerbaijan, from whence I will send you forth to obtain the crown of martyrdom. I myself will follow you, together with one of my loyal disciples, and will join you in the realm of eternity. Chapter 10. The Bab's Sojourn in Isfahan. The summer of the year AH 1262, AD 1846, was drawing to a close when the Bab bade his last farewell to his native city of Shiraz and proceeded to Isfahan. Syed Kazim-i Zanjani accompanied him on that journey. As he approached the outskirts of the city, he wrote a letter to the governor of the province, Manushir Khan, the Mutamidud Dawle, in which he requested him to signify his wish as to the place where he could dwell. The letter, which he entrusted to Syed Kazim, was expressive of such courtesy and revealed such exquisite penmanship that the Mutamid was moved to instruct the Sultanul Ulama, the Imam Jumi of Isfahan, the foremost ecclesiastical authority of that province, to receive the Bab in his own home and to accord him a kindly and generous reception. In addition to his message, the governor sent the Imam Jumi the letter he had received from the Bab. The Sultanul Ulama accordingly bade his own brother, whose savage cruelty in later years earned him the appellation of Raksha from Baha'u'llah. Footnote says Raksha means female serpent, to proceed with a number of his favorite companions to meet and escort the expected visitor to the gate of the city.
Okay, here Sultanul Ulama means the king of learned people. So this was the chief of the chief. in the ecclesiastical structure. That was his title. Like Ulama, right.
Would he be like a pope?
Not exactly.
Just within the city?
Cardinal.
Right,
Cardinal.
it's
Okay.
a cardinal. Imam Jum'eh means the leader of the Friday prayer. So it's
Because Sunday here is like Friday in Iran.
So here but remember, this is 2 years after declaration of Bab.
As the Bab approached, the Imam Jumi went out to welcome him in person and conducted him ceremoniously to his house. Such were the honours accorded to the Bab in those days that when, on a certain Friday, he was returning from the public bath to the house, a multitude of people were seen eagerly clamouring for the water which he had used for his ablutions. His fervent admirers firmly believed in his unfailing virtue and power to heal their sicknesses and ailments. The Imam Jumi himself had, from the very first night, become so enamoured with him who was the object of such devotion that, assuming the functions of an attendant, he undertook to minister to the needs and wants of his beloved guest. Seizing the ewer from the hand of the chief steward, and utterly ignoring the customary dignity of his rank, he proceeded to pour out the water over the hands of the Bab. One night after supper, the Imam Jumi, whose curiosity had been excited by the extraordinary traits of character which his youthful guest had revealed, ventured to request him to reveal a commentary on the Surah of Val Asr, which is the Quran 103. His request was readily granted. Calling for pen and paper, the Bab, with astonishing rapidity and without the least premeditation, began to reveal, in the presence of his host, a most illuminating interpretation of the aforementioned surah. It was nearing midnight when the Bab found himself engaged in the exposition of the manifold implications involved in the first letter of that surah. That letter, the letter Vav, upon which Sheikh Ahmadi Asai had already laid such emphasis in his writings, symbolized for the Bab the advent of a new cycle of divine revelation, and has since been alluded to by Baha'u'llah in the Kitab-i Aqdas in such passages as the mystery of the great reversal and the sign of the sovereign. The Bab soon after began to chant, in the presence of his host and his companions, the homily with which he had prefaced his commentary on the surah. Those words of power confounded his hearers with wonder. They seemed as if bewitched by the magic of his voice. Instinctively they started to their feet and together with the Imam Jumi reverently kissed the hem of his garment. Mullah Muhammad Taqi-i Harati, an eminent mujtahid, broke out into a sudden expression of exultation and praise. "Peerless and unique," he exclaimed, "as are the words which have streamed from this pen, to be able to reveal within so short a time, and in so legible a writing, so great a number of verses as to equal a fourth, nay, a third of the Quran, is in itself an achievement such as no mortal, without the intervention of God, could hope to perform. Neither the cleaving of the moon nor the quickening of the pebbles of the sea can compare with so mighty an act." As the Bab's fame was being gradually diffused over the entire city of Isfahan, an unceasing stream of visitors flowed from every quarter to the house of the Imam Jumi. A few to satisfy their curiosity, others to obtain a deeper understanding of the fundamental verities of his faith, and still others to seek the remedy for their ills and sufferings. The Mu'tamid himself came one day to visit the Bab, and while seated in the midst of an assemblage of the most brilliant and accomplished divines of Isfahan, requested him to expound the nature and demonstrate the validity of the Nubuvat-i Khasi, which is Muhammad's specific mission. He had previously, in that same gathering, called upon those who were present to adduce such proofs and evidences in support of this fundamental article of their faith as would constitute an unanswerable testimony for those who were inclined to repudiate its truth. No one, however, seemed capable of responding to his invitation. "Which do you prefer?" asked the Bab, "a verbal or a written answer to your question?" "A written reply," he answered, not only would please those who are present at this meeting, but would edify and instruct both the present and the future generations.
The Isfahan and Shiraz and Mashhad, these were actually centers of Islamic teachings. So there were a lot of schools, especially Isfahan, a lot of even Sufi doctrine came from the schools of Isfahan, generally. So it was a very open learning environments. There were a lot of universities or Islamic universities from or madrasas they called it at the time. So the governor of Isfahan obviously was, now this is a different area of the country, it's a different governor, wanted to know who this person is, and because of Bab'S, he instructed to accept him with open arms, and then Imam Jum'eh of Isfahan was in charge of basically receiving him and take care of his needs in general. So the whole process really revolves around the openness of society in Isfahan at the time versus what happened in Shiraz, which was his native land. And obviously, initially, they didn't think that this is a new idea. Like true Islamic culture actually instructs is in Muslims to actually pray for it 5 times a day, to really investigate the new message of God. So it's in their doctrine themselves that whoever brings you a new doctrine or ideology, is the duty of individual Muslim to examine it and accept it or reject it individually. So this is part of the culture. So that's why there were no animosity initially as he came in. And it points out to a very interesting part, and that is this, because they thought he's a holy man. The same way, for example, happened during the Jesus' time. And once Jesus was preaching, they basically thought that he's of course, it's a rogue, what do they call it, rabbi, right? So, but they really believe that he's a very, very spiritual person, and he has powers that is beyond their understanding, and he had a power of healing and so on and so forth. So same process that were occurring at the time, where they really truly believe that he's basically a spiritual person, and he has this power to even cure people and so on and so forth. So even those, and that's why the people were started to come to visit him, some for curiosity and some for really knowing actually what as their duty as a scholar of Islamic doctrine, to find out what is he talking about. But there was no animosity initially when he moved to Isfahan. And but the whole question of superstition regarding the powers that he had was quite interesting, which was referenced here as well. Still today, they believe the descendant of the Muhammad, or the 12th Imam, that they have these mausoleums for them all over Iran and Iraq. They have healing power. So people go and pray to them, and they kiss the locks of the door of the mausoleum and request for cures for their ills. It still happens today. So it's the power of this superstition that got mixed into Islam. It still exists today. It was interesting. One of the biggest problem of spread of cholera and this diseases that were basically were ravaged during the Reza Shah, which was the last 100 years, and previous Shah, was that these sick people would go to the site of these imamzadehs and masjids, and they would obviously throw money, but they were kissing the mirrors and locks of these mausoleums. And that's how the bacteria was getting transferred. And these guys were spreading and create these Muslim mausoleums were center of this spreading the disease. Now imagine the punishment. Now when new religion comes in and says, look, it abrogates this. You know how many people died because of they didn't accept a new manifestation that brought these messages to them that there is no power of cure in a mausoleum, or there is no clergy that can basically resolve your sickness. And it was interesting. The first showers that was installed in Iran during the time of Baha'u'llah was installed by Baha'is because they were trying to propagate the individual cleanliness and shutting down those Turkish baths or the big public baths that existed, which was filthy. And so the whole process, as you see, is very difficult for us to put ourselves in the context of what was politically or socially happening at the time, and this superstition that was permeated in this society.
I remember as a child being in the house of the Bab. We had gone to Shiraz and visited the house of the Bab, and I remember the Baha'is as they're coming down their stairs just kissing every step, and I was thinking, why are they doing that, you know? But I think it's just something inside of us human beings where we say, well, these are the steps that the Prophet of God, you know, descended or ascended, and we just, I don't know.
It's a cultural issue, but this doesn't mean that if you name yourself Baha'i, you get rid of your prejudices. It just doesn't do anything. There's no savior who say, I am a Baha'i, now you're suddenly saved. Or it doesn't work that way. Unfortunately, I wish that was true. Stop here. It's something I missed. This nabovat khase. This is really very important. Means that what was the purpose of Muhammad's mission? So the interpretation of Bab regarding this particular message, they were saying it took almost 1/4 to 1/3 of Quran was basically defining what the motive or a specific mission of Muhammad was. So it's really very important in terms of imagining in few hours you write 1/3 of Quran that took 27 years for Muhammad to compile the Quran itself with all the verses. And Sheikh Ahmad Ahsai, there was a reference to him also, which was saying, and I guess regarding the hidden meaning of a letter in the surah that from an interpretation, and it showed how Bab was versed in the Quranic doctrine, and really proves, and people were actually, when they were reading Bab's interpretation, they would come to the same conclusion that the source of Quran and the interpretation of the words are coming from the same source. So this was really the power of writing itself, where the power of sword was moved to the power of words in this dispensation.
The Bab instantly took up his pen and began to write. In less than 2 hours, he had filled about 50 pages with a most refreshing and circumstantial inquiry into the origin, the character, and the pervasive influence of Islam. The originality of his dissertation, the vigor and vividness of the style, the accuracy of its minutest details, invested his treatment of that noble theme with an excellence which no one among those who were present on that occasion could have failed to perceive. With masterly insight, he linked the central idea in the concluding passage of this exposition with the advent of the promised Qa'im and the expected return of the Imam Hussein. A footnote says reference to his own mission and to Baha'u'llah's subsequent revelation. He argued with such force and courage that those who heard him recite its verses were astounded by the magnitude of his revelation. No one dared to insinuate the slightest objection, much less openly to challenge his statements. The Mu'tamid could not help giving vent to his enthusiasm and joy. "Hear me," he exclaimed, "members of this revered assembly, I take you as my witnesses. Never until this day have I in my heart been firmly convinced of the truth of Islam. I can henceforth, thanks to this exposition penned by this youth, declare myself a firm believer in the faith proclaimed by the Apostle of God. I solemnly testify to my belief in the reality of the superhuman power with which this youth is endowed, a power which no amount of learning can ever impart." With these words, he brought the meeting to an end.
Okay, so here again, these are really positions that they were understanding Quran. So they were looking at him as a very learned person, not a person that brought a new book or new laws. So this were clearly were showing the depth of knowledge that he had regarding Quran and explicating that those verses of Quran for Muslims. And this is Imam Jum'ah that is telling people that I didn't know Islam before I heard this, of what was the purpose of Islam. So this shows how he attracted. And a lot of these issues really goes back to how basically the process of teaching. How do you teach? So it goes back, so you need to know the subject that the person is interested in, and you're bringing to them reality of what it meant. Not what they concocted, not what other people thought it was, or the cultural translation of what the source of it was. So by him describing, and as we know, the manifestations have the innate knowledge of the prior manifestations' purpose. So for him, it was a natural release of this information that he already knew. That's why it only took him a couple of hours and he wrote it down. So these are the key elements of approach, is not to say Baha'i religion is good and Muslim is bad, because they're all part of the same process. If you translate properly Judaism, you reach Christianity. If you translate Christianity properly, with the signs you get to the Muslim religion. If you translate the Muslim religion properly in its original meaning, you end up with Bab'i and Baha'i religion. So this is really clearly, yes.
I was watching the commentary of a guy who is a professor in American University in Lebanon on TV. And he was saying what's happening in the world of Shia is exactly against the mission of Muhammad. And he was saying that the mission of Muhammad was to get rid of the idols, because people were worshipping idols. And if the things did not go right for them in their life, they get the sword and cut the head of the idol. And they make another idol, they build another idol, they worship idols. So Prophet Muhammad came to show people the creator of us is not these idols. But in today Shia religion, Marja' Taqlid, who is putting himself to be worshipped and look up to, is the same ideology of worshipping idol.
He says he's talking about source of imitation.
Right.
See, this concept of source of imitation gives power to the hierarchy of the clergy, that if you do what I say, you're absolved for the consequences of your action.
It's that way in the Christian religion as well.
Well, people don't really believe in it, although the priest trying to propagate this, but people don't.
If you go to a priest and you confess your sins and he tells you
No,
to
of
do,
course.
yeah, he
Yeah.
tells you to do, 20 Hail Marys,
That-
do a
and
little
then you do
dance,
it
you're
the
okay.
next week. No, but this is more dangerous, because what they believe is truly any action, even causing harm to another individual, if it's sanctioned by the priest or the leader, this is Marja' Taqlid means is. That means that you're emulating what the person wants. So this is what Kambi is mentioning, relates to that ideology that I am the driver. So if let's say Sistani, Ayatollah Sistani in Iraq says that this is Islamic jihad against these Sunnis up north, then people would take up arms and go and kill them. And they're absolved of the outcome. It's dangerous generally, because it takes away individual responsibility from individuals.
Well, instead of they focus or direct their attention to God, they pay their homage and also loyalty to the head of this person who is a religious leader. And he's comparing that is the same as idol.
That's right. Idols that Muhammad already.
Okay, I see your point.
You see?
Or worshipping a
Right.
stone.
Yes.
That's
That's
right.
Right.
Rather
Same
than
right.
self-conscious, that's word the jihad means. Jah means a struggle within. You see, so instead of doing that to deal with themselves and correct themselves, they look upon somebody else to direct them.
Deity or something.
Right, and then he was saying once they have to depend on him, this is where the crash of thought will happen. People cannot think correctly anymore. They have to follow him, you see, and that's exactly what happened to the revolution in Iran.
Right, of course. But the whole key really is when this new blueprint of society came in, Baha'u'llah, in Baha'i religion, completely absolved the station of priest. Completely absolved, because they knew what's going to happen. And the reason priest existed, or at the time of Muhammad, or at the time of Jesus, was because people couldn't read or write. And actually, Luther, when what his beef was with the Catholic priests was that they were propagating their own messages locally, which had nothing to do with Bible. So he said, look, let's print this book and let's everybody read it and see what these guys are doing. It had nothing to do, because they were doing something during the Dark Ages in Europe, whatever atrocities they were doing under this ideology of Christianity, and even Europeans call it Dark Ages, had nothing to do with the Bible. So what they were doing, they actually were toward the, I think it was 15th century, they were actually retrieving all the Bibles so people wouldn't read it. And they would go only through the priest, which was the interpreter of the Bible. And of course, when the first German Bible was produced and it was propagated, people found out that all these Catholic priests were basically practicing their own religion, had nothing to do with Christianity. And atrocities and tax collecting and doing favors, all these issues had nothing to do with Christianity. And then where the Protestant movement occurred. And of course, ironically, the Renaissance that occurred between 14th and 17th centuries, where all this stuff that Christians learned by going to Islamic schools in Spain, learning the art of government, the separation of church and state, coexistence of ideas, and they relearned the Greek mythology and philosophy. They relearned it because peace destroyed all of the competing ideology to Christianity. So Muslims that translated the Greek philosophy into Arabic, and through the movement of the priests that they went to Spain to learn, and learned people, they relearned actually the philosophy or Greek philosophy back. They translated back to Latin from Arabic, because it didn't exist. So this key is that the beginning of the Renaissance in Europe, that was through Protestant movement, and of course learning of the doctrine in Spain, created the knowledge, Islamic knowledge, for Europe to come out of the Dark Ages. So Renaissance, that Western culture refers to modernization, actually has Islamic roots. Had nothing to do with Christianity, because Christianity was completely destroyed. And what they were practicing was basically these priests doing whatever they choose to do for their own benefit and hierarchy in general. I think we're coming to an end.